Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today's going to be the last day we're looking at the stuff sent in from Jonas. There might be a tiny little bit of overlap on the char footage. I'm sorry about that. It depends how long I end up speaking during this video. But yeah, we're going to be talking about mechanics. Before we get started though, there was a couple of things I wanted to follow up on from last lore episode. There were two things really people mentioned a lot, and I think really you just got the wrong impression of what I was saying. First, I mentioned that humanity was more distant from the Elder Dragon threat. Now, I wasn't saying that they had no experience with the Elder Dragons whatsoever. I'm well aware that when Zaitan rose ore, that flooded their coastlines, and that was the destruction of Lion's Arch, Kryta's old capital, and that was quite a significant event. But I am saying, however, that out of all the races right now, I would personally put the humans at the top of all the races that seem to have a lot more of their own problems going on, and who do not appreciate the threat of the Elder Dragons out of all of the races. Yes, there certainly were things that happened, and I did try to qualify that and say that in the video, but that seems to have gone over a few people's heads. Yes, it is true the humans have got a stake in this fight against the Elder Dragons, and at the end of the day, if they didn't have that stake, then you could ask why they'd be a playable race at all in Guild Wars 2. So yeah, there is stuff going on there. It's just the humans care so much more about this treaty with the Char and all kinds of other stuff that they definitely push it under the rug a lot more than the other races. The other thing that some people were commenting on was when I mentioned that the Sylvari were much more focused on taking out Zaitan than the rest of the races. Yes, I am aware of the Nightmare Court, and the Sylvari certainly do have their own inner struggles and their own lore going on. In fact, if you were to read the series of blogs that came out during the race weeks on ArenaNet's official blog, and you read the Sylvari stuff, there's so much more information about the Sylvari than there are really about the other races out there. They have got a lot going on. However, their main antagonist race, the Nightmare Court, they haven't joined the legions of any dragons like the Sons of Svarnir, for example, have. Their inner issues don't cloud the Sylvari's judgment of the threat of the Elder Dragons. Someone from the Nightmare Court doesn't necessarily not care about facing Zaitan. They more stand by the belief that the Ventari tablet and everything that the Centaur taught the Sylvari and everything that they're building their society around has somehow corrupted the true way of the Sylvari, which is an entirely different topic altogether. All Sylvari, Nightmare Court or not, do still appreciate the Elder Dragon threat, and certainly out of all of the races are doing the most earliest to try and directly combat this threat from rising, and that's all I was really trying to say. But anyway, yeah, so we're going to be talking about mechanics. The first question was asked by Zengara11, who said, hey, I'm a bit concerned about this game because the world versus world will be some kind of raid in the night. I feel like world versus world, but right now there isn't any limit of how much you can play in there, and I'm a bit concerned that the guild leader, I really wonder whether I should read these questions with correct grammar sometimes. I'm a bit concerned that the guild leader of the big guilds will throw you out if you don't log on at weird hours in the night. Is that a big problem? Second question, won't there be only a few servers to fight against? I mean, if we can't fight against a server who's 5 hours ahead behind us, wouldn't that be weird? Okay, yeah, well really I picked this question because I felt like you were quite misinformed, and I wonder sometimes how worthwhile it is going for questions like this, because I am curious how many people aren't 100% sure on things like this. First off, this idea with the guild, someone requiring you to come on during odd hours of the night, really that's your own personal choice whether you're in a guild like that. If you are in a situation where your guild leader or the people you play with are threatening to kick you out because you're not participating in things you don't want to, then leave the guild. I mean, that's just down to them. Not every single guild's going to do this, and I would certainly say that Guild Wars 2 isn't encouraging that behaviour. It's just that behaviour like that will crop up in most games, not just MMOs, but it can be made worse in certain situations. So it is a possibility, and I wouldn't sit here and say that no guild will ever be like that, but I would say that you should feel comfortable leaving a guild if they're forcing you to do things that you simply aren't having fun doing, and especially if they're threatening to kick you out. Yes, there probably will be bad practices like this, and especially with the Guild Wars 2's influence system, whereby more active guilds get better benefits, I can certainly see this kind of thing happening, but really, I don't think that's a fault of the game. That's really more a fault of communities in general, which it's certainly not the developer's responsibility to try and change on a wide scale, and it's also down to you as an individual. If you don't like those kinds of practices, then I would just leave, and I kind of have that answer to a lot of questions. As for your second thing, yeah, we were quite curious about the servers for a while, but I think what we've seen in beta kind of sums it up well enough at the moment. Really, the time zone thing isn't going to be an issue because servers as we've seen them right now, and as it looks like they're going to be in launch, really you've just got the US servers and then you've got EU servers. Everyone else kind of doesn't get their own and they have to pick which one they want to go to, which does kind of suck, but that does mean mean you're not going to have one US server that's for the West Coast while another one's for the East Coast. They probably won't do that. So overall, time differences that could affect World versus World in this way probably won't happen. So I'm not expecting to see, as certain times of the day go by, certain teams in World versus World, like the green team, will suddenly have massive dominion over the map, and then when they all fall asleep, the red team will come to conquer them. I don't think that will happen just because the servers are so loose in Guild Wars 2. And I actually wonder whether they shouldn't be so loose. I would quite like for certain servers to have certain roles, especially like just designate one server on the EU side and one server on the US side for certain things. Like, in particular, we talked about before, I do think we should have a roleplay server, but ArenaNet just aren't interested in splitting off the community or dictating these kinds of things. They think that the community can handle it themselves. I would disagree, but we'll have to see how things go in launch. We did see in beta that certain people said, right, I'm going to be going to this server and all these people are going to be going here, and the community did try to dictate certain servers to certain things, but I didn't really see that work at all. For example, the server I was playing on, that was supposed to be a French server. I never met a single French person the entire time through beta. It's because these community ran things don't penetrate the community as well as maybe ArenaNet think that they're going to. We'll have to see how it goes after launch, but certainly this issue with World vs. World, I'm certainly not expecting to see. Desolus asked, are there any professions that you feel haven't been incorporated into the 8 in Guild Wars 2 that were in Guild Wars 1? If so, do you think we're likely to see new professions with expansions or new skills added to existing professions? I know the Elementalist sort of covers it, but wouldn't the cancelled Chronomancer be cool to play? This is something that a lot of people have been asking, really, and as I've said before, I don't think that they will add new professions. I think we'll definitely get new races, because that does mean the addition of new skills, but these have always been designed to be less important than profession-based skills in the first place. So balance for PvP in particular shouldn't be thrown completely out of the window for this. And I think very possibly, I wouldn't bank on it, I'm not a massive fan of it, but they might add new weapons for existing professions. But past that, I think they've really covered all their bases, especially when you look at the Guild Wars 1 stuff. Some people will say, oh, the Ritualist doesn't exist in Guild Wars 2. And there's a distinction between the theme of the profession and how it functions mechanically in the game. You would be right in saying that thematically, the Ritualist doesn't exist in Guild Wars 2. Does that mean that there's actually a gameplay space for it in Guild Wars 2, though? No, I wouldn't say that, because that role that the Ritualist played, or at least one of the roles that the Ritualist played, is now being fulfilled by the Engineer, who gets to place down their turrets, which really, mechanically, are what the Spirits were in Guild Wars 1. So there are certain thematic differences, but even then, I think they've covered all the core things that we've come to expect in MMOs. There are some more niche professions or classes that you see in other MMOs. For example, like the Death Knight role really doesn't exist in Guild Wars 2, and I'm wondering whether they're going to try and incorporate that in some way. But then you could argue, because we're just looking at that as a theme, a type of character, that really that could be added with another race or perhaps another weapon. So actual professions, I think, are off the table. There are things like the Chronomancer, which, yes, they are all cool ideas, and ArenaNet have definitely played with them. As you may know, while they were developing the game, they actually had 12 different professions for a while that they wanted to do, but eventually it was cut down to 8 because they felt like some were redundant. You can't get past the problem that as you add more professions in, full professions, they start to feel less distinct from one another, which is something Guild Wars 2 I think is doing really well for its professions right now. Not all of the professions are balanced at the moment, certainly, and the professions do need more tweaking in that area, but they do all feel very unique. They all have their own types of skills, and for the most part their own themes too, which is very good. If you're playing as a ranger, you will definitely feel, both in the gameplay and in the way you look and feel, very different to a warrior or an engineer or any of the other classes. As you add more and more, I mean, some games are very shameless about this, and they'll add a new class that's just using a certain skill type from one profession and a certain skill type from another and combining them together, and really there's nothing unique or distinct about that. So I'm quite happy that they're with 8, and I'm still personally hoping that they leave it that way, even though, you know, the idea of a summoner profession or a time manipulating profession are still thematic holes in the game. I'd rather the gameplay stay solid regardless. The last question I'll try to be quick with so I don't hit the limit and have to speed up the video again was asked by adragon202, who said, how do you feel about the flat leveling? This can be a quick question. I noticed that as I progressed from zone to zone, the time to level didn't change at all that much. However, the amount of experience it took to level did increase. When I originally heard about flat leveling, I was expecting the experience necessary to level would be consistent such that I would be able to gain viable experience no matter where I chose to spend my time to level. Do you really think that the leveling curve is flat? I do think that the leveling curve's flat. flat. I think that they've still stuck with their initial idea with having a flat leveling curve, but this is certainly an aspect to leveling up that we can't ignore, and I suppose, yeah, there are probably a few people like you that might have got the wrong impression from this. Now, I think they've got a very sound reason for doing it this way, and really you can look at not just Guild Wars 2 but any RPG. I'd say that really this is a core feature of actual leveling up, right? Why is it that most games have always required you to have more and more experience as you go through? And really it comes down to, as far as I can see it, they don't want you to be able to stick around in early game areas and experience getting way too much experience and leveling up too fast. Because despite the fact that in Guild Wars 2 you are sidekicked down and still given roughly appropriate rewards, especially in comparison to other games, things still do get easier while you're in those early game areas. Not only do you have a greater understanding of all the events and things that are going on there and potentially find something that would have given you a lot of experience, you're also getting more skills, and as you level up, the amount you're scaled down actually does reduce more and more. Level 80 scaled down to level 5 is still more powerful than level 40 scaled down to level 5. So there is still an impact there where things are slowly going to be getting easier and easier and easier. I think this is really for two purposes. One, they don't want people finding a certain event chain that perhaps they could farm, and they could do that all the way up to level 80. At least in this way, eventually the experience in these lower level areas isn't going to be worth it, and it will encourage people to go further out into the game. And that's the other reason as well. It's to encourage people to explore Tyria and have a reason to go to the more high-end areas. A lot of people complain about this kind of thing. It's like, oh, I don't want ArenaNet to force me to explore. Guild Wars 2 is supposed to allow me to have ultimate freedom. Guild Wars 2 does give you a lot of freedom, but this is something that's really starting to annoy me, actually, about the community. And that's that a lot of people think that Guild Wars 2 is giving them a lot of freedom in a lot of areas, which it certainly is, and is certainly a very good thing. But people are starting to confuse it for a sandbox game. Giving players a bit of direction or a bit of reason to leave early game areas, I think, is a very good thing. Games need to give players things for them to do, and I really don't like the direction some people would push the game in, where they just want absolute freedom, where everything gives all the same flat rewards and they don't have to do anything specific to get any skills or any weapons or equipment. They just want everything kind of handed to them so they can do it in their own way. I do think that if you take that too far, that can be a problem. And the leveling system here, it is still a flat leveling curve, as ArenaNet have said. They said before that they've kind of settled on a certain amount of time, about an hour and a half, I believe. They said they think it is the most fun area for leveling up, and they want, in general, levels in Guild Wars 2 to take about that much time to complete. Whether the beta actually reflected this at the moment, I think, is irrelevant, because they can always tweak it, or maybe their idea of what a fun amount of time to level has slightly changed by this point. But they have settled on a certain amount of time, and there will be a point, as long as you are still progressing through the game world and experiencing new content, you will get to enjoy that flat leveling curve. But by the same token, there are certainly things you can do in game, and this might come as a shock to some people, like staying in early game areas where it will take you a lot longer to level up. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that's something that all RPGs, not just MMOs, as I said, employ, and they employ it for good reason. You don't want to start a game like Final Fantasy and then be able to get everybody to level 99 just because you stuck around in an early game area. There are reasons for this. It means that any challenge ArenaNet might have set up for you later on as you go through the game is now just completely wasted, because you're, even though sidekick down once again, and it won't be such a problem for Guild Wars 2, you could potentially be over leveled for it. Having said all that, I think ArenaNet haven't done themselves any favours. They seem to have two conflicting ideas here, where on the one hand they're saying that players should be able to be sidekicked down so that content is never trivialized by the character becoming too powerful, and they're saying that you should get roughly level appropriate rewards even for going to early game areas. On the one hand, they've got this idea, which is a nice idea, but then on the other hand, they've left enough leeway in that same sidekicking down system that people can get more powerful from leveling up anyway, and if that goes too far, then it could just make it all for nothing. So I'm curious to see how these two things are going to balance out with what they've done with the experience system here, and how much change there really is between a level 80 sidekick down to level 5 and a level 40 sidekick down to level 5. Because if it's too much, content will be trivialized anyway. I think there might be a little bit at odds, which is curious. We'll have to see how it goes in release when we actually do have a lot of level 80 players to actually look at and see how they find it running around Queensdale, for example. But to your question itself, do I think the leveling curve is flat? flat? I would say yes. I would definitely say it is still flat, but there are caveats to that. Maybe caveats we didn't see coming. You have to keep progressing in the general direction that the game wants you to if you want it to stay flat. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Daily for today. Thanks very much for the char footage once again. You can find a link down in the description below if you want to check it all out for yourself. And I guess I will see you all tomorrow.